The foreman held the cracked valve housing up to the light and laughed so hard his throat bladders inflated to full display. A wet, rippling sound that bounced off the hangar walls and set the other Vesk technicians into sympathetic vibration, their own bladders swelling in the involuntary social cascade their species used to reinforce consensus. "He wants to fix it," the foreman said, still holding the housing aloft like evidence at a tribunal. "The human apprentice wants to fix the Kessler series manifold with his hands." I didn't correct him. The housing was a Kessler series pressure manifold rated for deep atmosphere work on gas giant harvesting platforms. A piece of equipment the Vesk considered sacred in the way that functional civilizations consider their most expensive infrastructure sacred. The crack ran from the intake collar to the third pressure ring, a fracture pattern the Vesk diagnostic manual classified as terminal structural compromise requiring full unit replacement from certified Kessler foundry stock. The replacement cost was listed in the manual. The delivery time was 14 station weeks. The harvesting platform sitting dead in the bay with its manifold cracked, and its atmosphere pumps offline was losing revenue at a rate that made the replacement cost look like pocket lint. But the manual said replace, so the Vesk replaced. The manual did not have a chapter on repair. The Vesk did not repair Kessler manifolds. The concept existed the way paradoxes existed in philosophy, technically describable, practically absurd. Apprentice Coulter. Foreman Dreln Vasic set the housing on the diagnostic bench with the careful placement of someone returning a holy object to its altar. His skin was the mottled gray-green of senior Vesk maintenance caste, slick with the dermal moisture their species secreted under emotional activation, amusement, in this case, which presented identically to mild contempt in the Vesk physiological register. "You have been assigned to this bay for 11 station weeks. In that time you have swept deck plating, organized gasket inventory, and calibrated torque sensors. These are appropriate tasks for a compact exchange apprentice of your certification level. Kessler manifold repair is not." "I understand the classification system, foreman." "Then you understand that what you are proposing is not within it." "I understand the housing is cracked, the platform is offline, the replacement is 14 weeks out. I can fix it in 6 hours." The laughter came back, not just Dreln this time but 4 other technicians at adjacent bays, their bladders inflating in the rolling Vesk cascade that turned individual amusement into collective verdict. The sound was biological consensus. When enough Vesk laughed at the same thing, it became institutionally funny, logged in the social memory as a shared reference point for future dismissals. I was being filed under comedy. Dreln's secondary eyelid slid halfway across, the Vesk expression I'd learned to read as patient indulgence toward a junior who had said something outside their depth. 6 hours. To do what no Vesk technician has done in the 40 years since the Kessler series entered service. No Vesk technician has tried. Because the procedure does not exist. The procedure doesn't exist in your manual. The technique exists. It's old, older than your station. Dreln looked at me the way Vesk looked at things they were about to dismiss. Head tilted 12 degrees left, throat bladders settling to resting state, the wet sheen on his skin dulling as his emotional activation dropped to baseline. Dismissal was a cooling process for the Vesk. Interest ran warm. Contempt ran cool. Indifference was room temperature. Describe the technique. Cold welding. Molecular bonding under vacuum, using pressure and surface preparation instead of heat. The manifold's crystalline structure won't tolerate thermal repair. Your manual is correct about that. But the manual assumes repair means heat. Cold welding doesn't use heat. It uses contact. Contact. Clean the fracture surfaces to atomic smoothness. Bring them together under controlled pressure in hard vacuum. The crystal lattices bond across the interface because there's nothing between them to prevent bonding. No heat damage. No stress fracture propagation. The repair is structurally identical to the original casting. Silence, not the impressed kind, the diagnostic kind. Vesk's silence was data collection. They went quiet when they were running inputs against their internal models, and the length of the silence was proportional to the distance between the input and the nearest existing category. This silence lasted 4 full seconds. In the Vesk repair bay, where every procedure had a manual entry, and every manual entry had a time estimate accurate to the quarter hour, 4 seconds of uncategorized silence was an eternity. "You are describing a theoretical process," Dreln said. "I'm describing a process humans have used for 300 years. On Kessler manifolds. On everything, hull plating, pressure vessels, optical components. Anything with a crystalline or metallic bonding structure that you can prepare to sufficient surface purity in vacuum." Dreln's secondary eyelids retracted fully, the Vesk expression of reluctant attention. His skin was warming again. Interest, despite his professional obligation to dismiss me. "The Compact Exchange Apprentice Certification," he said, "does not authorize manifold class repairs. The Compact Exchange Apprentice Certification doesn't authorize me to use your lavatory without a hall pass. I'm not asking for authorization. I'm asking for the housing, 6 hours, and access to the vacuum prep chamber." A technician named Solvek Wren, senior grade, 19 years in the bay, skin so dark with age that the moisture sheen looked like oil on slate, spoke from his station without looking up from the valve assembly he was documenting for disposal. "Let him try. The housing is condemned. If he damages it further, the replacement order is already filed." "The manual," Dreln began. "The manual says replace. The replacement is 14 weeks away. The platform loses 40,000 trade units per day offline. Let the human play with the condemned part. If he fails, we lose nothing. If he succeeds." Solvik paused. Not for effect, the Vesk didn't use pauses for effect. He paused because the conditional required him to describe an outcome he had no framework for, and the absence of framework required a recalculation that took precisely as long as the silence lasted. "If he succeeds, we learn something." Dreln looked at the manifold housing, looked at me, looked at Solvek. The cascade was broken. No laughter this time, just the wet processing silence of a foreman whose institutional certainties were being weighed against a revenue clock. 6 hours, he said, vacuum chamber 3. If the housing integrity drops below 92% on the post-repair diagnostic, the attempt is logged as damage, and your certification review is flagged. Understood. An apprentice Coulter. His throat bladders inflated to quarter, mild emphasis, the Vesk equivalent of raising an eyebrow. "If you contaminate the vacuum chamber, I will personally file the decontamination costs against your exchange stipend, and you will spend the remainder of your rotation cleaning atmosphere filters with a hand brush." Also understood. I carried the manifold housing to vacuum chamber 3 the way you carry a cracked egg, steady hands. Even pace, no sudden movements. The Vesk watched me cross the bay floor with the particular attention their species directed at things that were either about to be instructive or about to be entertaining, and the distinction between the two was the thing they hadn't decided yet. The vacuum chamber was a cylindrical workspace 3 meters in diameter, originally designed for Vesk standard precision assembly work, electronics, optics, anything that benefited from a particle-free environment. It was not designed for structural repair. It was not equipped for structural repair. The tools inside were calibrated for micrometer scale work. The lighting was clinical. The atmosphere evacuation system could pull the chamber to hard vacuum in 90 seconds, which was the one specification that mattered. I set the housing on the alignment bench. Pulled my kit from the tool belt the Compact had issued me, a belt the Vesk supply officer had handed over with the verbal disclaimer that the tools were rated for apprentice-level maintenance, and that any application beyond apprentice-level maintenance would be considered unauthorized use of compact-tissued equipment and could result in a review of the exchange agreement's liability provisions. The kit contained a set of graduated abrasive films rated from coarse to optical grade, a magnification loupe, a hand pressure clamp assembly I had fabricated from spare parts during my third station week, because the compact kit did not include one and the VESC did not manufacture one, because no VESC procedure called for one. A tube of alignment paste colloidal suspension that I could apply to the fracture surfaces to verify contact uniformity before final bonding, and a patience that no tool catalog listed, but that the entire technique demanded. Cold welding was not complicated. It was tedious. The theory was undergraduate physics. Two atomically clean metal surfaces brought into contact in vacuum will bond spontaneously because the atoms at each surface cannot distinguish between atoms of the same metal. No heat, no flux, no adhesive, just contact between surfaces clean enough that the crystal lattice propagates across the joint as if the fracture never happened. The practice was the hard part. Atomically clean meant atomically clean. No oxide layer, no contamination, no particulate. On Earth, any metal surface exposed to air developed an oxide skin within milliseconds. In the VESC repair bay, exposed to station atmosphere, the manifold housing's fracture surfaces were covered in oxide and absorbed gas molecules and microscopic debris from 11 station weeks of sitting on a diagnostic shelf being used as a cautionary example. Step 1. Abrasive preparation. Starting with the coarsest film, I worked both fracture surfaces in overlapping strokes, not grinding, not sanding, but lapping. Controlled material removal measured in microns per pass, building toward a surface geometry that was flat to within fractions of a wavelength of light. The VESC abrasive films were excellent, precision-manufactured, consistent grit, designed for their optical work. They had the tools. They had never thought to use them this way. The first hour was abrasive work. Patient, repetitive, meditative. Stroke, check, rotate, stroke. The VESC craft philosophy valued speed and standardization. A good technician was a fast technician because time on task was money lost. My craft philosophy valued something different. My grandfather had been a jeweler in a town in Ohio where the economy ran on things that lasted, and he had taught me to work metal the way he set stones. Slowly, by feel, with the understanding that the material would tell you when it was ready if you were quiet enough to listen. The manifold housing was not speaking to me in any mystical sense. But under the loupe, the fracture surface was changing, the rough, jagged topology of the original break smoothing into a flat plane that caught the chamber's clinical light and reflected it back with increasing uniformity. Each pass removed less material and produced more mirror. The surface was converging on the flatness I needed. Through the chamber's observation window, I could see the bay. Dreln had returned to his station, but his secondary eyelids were cycling, glancing toward the chamber every 30 to 40 seconds, the VESC version of pretending not to watch while absolutely watching. Solvik had angled his workstation display to include the chamber window in his peripheral vision. Two junior technicians had invented reasons to work at the bench nearest the observation window, performing maintenance tasks that I was fairly certain did not require that specific bench location. I didn't mind the audience. The technique didn't require privacy. It required patience, and patience was not a limited resource. Hour 2. Fine abrasive work. The surfaces were approaching optical flatness. Under the loupe, I could see the crystalline grain structure of the manifold alloy emerging, a regular lattice of metallic bonds that the Kessler foundry had grown under controlled conditions, and that my abrasive work was exposing, layer by molecular layer, like an archaeologist uncovering a mosaic. The beauty of the manifold's alloy was that it was designed for exactly this, a crystalline regularity, low defect density, predictable bonding behavior. The Kessler engineers had created a material that was perfect for cold welding, and had never once considered that anyone would cold weld it, because their manual said replace. Hour 3. I switched to optical grade film and slowed my stroke rate by half. Each pass now removed material measured in single-digit nanometers. The surface under the loop had shifted from reflective to something beyond reflective, a flatness so complete that the surface appeared to be not a surface at all but a window into the interior of the metal, the crystalline structure visible as a faint geometric pattern beneath what looked like still water. The bay had grown quieter. Not deliberately, the VESC didn't modulate their environment for dramatic effect. Quieter because work was being done more slowly at adjacent stations. Tools were being used with less urgency. The background rhythm of the repair bay, the constant percussion of diagnostics, the hiss of pneumatic tools, the wet conversational murmur of VESC technical consultation, had decelerated. The bay was watching, and watching cost the same cognitive bandwidth as working, and something had to give. I applied alignment paste to both surfaces. Thin, even coat. Brought the two halves together by hand, the alignment pins engaging with a precision click that sent a slight vibration through my fingers. Separated them. Checked the paste transfer pattern under the loop. The imprint was uniform across 94% of the contact area. Not enough. I needed 98. More lapping. 20 minutes on the high spots the paste had revealed. Another paste check. 96% again. 97 again. 98.2. Close enough was not a phrase that existed in cold welding. Close enough was the gap where failure lived. My grandfather had said that about stone setting, and it was true about everything. The last 2% of preparation took longer than the first 98, and the last 2% was the difference between a repair and a waste of time. One more round. 99.1% contact uniformity. The surfaces were ready. Through the observation window, I counted 11 VESC in visual range of the chamber. The bay had 26 assigned technicians. 11 watching meant the work had crossed some threshold in the VESC social attention economy. It had been reclassified from comedy to something that did not yet have a category name. I assembled the pressure clamp onto the housing. My fabricated clamp, built from a hydraulic cylinder salvaged from a decommissioned cargo loader, a pressure plate machined from scrap alloy on the bay's lathe during a lunch break, and a torque gauge borrowed from Solvex Station, with the tacit understanding that borrowing was different from requesting, because requesting required a form, and the form required a certification level I did not possess. The clamp settled onto the manifold housing with the authority of something built for the specific job it was now doing. Not elegant, functional. My grandfather would have approved of the clamp. He had no interest in elegance. He had profound interest in things that did what they were supposed to do. Chamber evacuation, I said to the intercom. Standard protocol, vacuum ops required verbal confirmation from the bay supervisor. Silence. Then Drelln's voice, stripped of its earlier amusement, carrying only the flat procedural tone the VESC used for operations they were taking seriously. Evacuation authorized. Chamber 3. Pressure target 10 to the -6 Pascal. Confirm when stable. The pumps engaged. Air hissed out of the chamber through the evacuation ports with a sound that dropped in pitch as the atmosphere thinned. A descending whistle that ended in silence so complete it had texture. Hard vacuum. The absence of everything between me and the work. I was sealed in a pressure suit for this part. Standard VESC EVA gear. Sized for their frames. Adjusted for mine with the same improvisational tailoring that characterized everything in my existence on this station. The suit was too wide in the shoulders, too long in the torso, and the gloves had 4 finger slots where I needed 5. So I doubled my ring and pinky fingers into the 4th slot and developed a grip technique that compensated for the reduced dexterity. The compensation had taken 3 weeks to master. The Vesk did not know I had spent 3 weeks mastering it because they had not been watching during those 3 weeks. Because during those 3 weeks I had been doing things they considered unworthy of attention, sweeping, sorting, calibrating. And the muscle memory I'd built while doing those things was invisible to anyone who measured competence by title. In vacuum, with the surfaces lapped to optical flatness, and the oxide layer removed by the final abrasive pass, the manifold's fracture surfaces were atomically clean. Naked metal, crystal lattice exposed, every atom at the surface reaching for a bonding partner it no longer had because the fracture had separated it from the atom it was supposed to be bonded to. I aligned the halves, placed them together. Applied clamping pressure, slow, controlled, the torque gauge climbing in increments I could feel through the doubled glove fingers. The pressure pushed the two surfaces into contact, and at the contact interface, across the 99.1% of surface area where the preparation had achieved atomic flatness, something happened that was simultaneously the most advanced and the most primitive metallurgical process in existence. The atoms bonded. No heat, no light, no sound, no drama, just the fundamental physics of metallic bonding asserting itself across a joint that had been a fracture and was now, at the atomic level, indistinguishable from the original casting. I held the pressure for 30 minutes. The bonding was instantaneous at the atomic scale, but the macroscopic stress distribution needed time to equilibrate. The crystal lattice on either side of the joint rearranging its internal stresses to accommodate the new bond, settling into an energy minimum that would hold under the manifold's rated operating pressure, with the same margin the original casting had provided. Through the visor, through the observation window, I could see the bay. 15 Vesk now. Dreln had moved to a position directly in front of the window, his secondary eyelids fully retracted, his skin sheen elevated to the level I associated with sustained high interest. Solvik had abandoned any pretense of working, and was standing beside Dreln with his arms crossed, the Vesk posture of reserved assessment, the one they adopted when they were forming a conclusion they were not yet willing to voice. I released the clamp, repressurized the chamber, removed the housing from the bench and carried it to the diagnostic station without ceremony, because ceremony was not part of the technique, and the technique was the only thing that mattered. The diagnostic was a Vesk standard integrity assessment, ultrasonic mapping of the crystal structure, pressure testing to rated capacity, then to 120%, then to 140% maximum operational load. The results appeared on the display in the Vesk diagnostic format, a color-mapped cross-section of the manifold housing, with structural integrity represented as a gradient from red through amber to green. Green across the entire cross-section, including the repair joint. Structural integrity at the repair site, 98.7% of original specification. Dreln stared at the display. His throat bladders performed a motion I had never seen, a slow, involuntary deflation, the air leaving them in a controlled exhale that produced no sound, the Vesk equivalent of a held breath releasing. "That is not possible," he said. But he said it the way a scientist says something is not possible while looking at the data that says it is, not a denial, but a framework being revised in real time. "The crystalline structure propagated across the joint," I said. "The bond is metallic, not adhesive. The repair site is structurally continuous with the original material. It's not as strong as the original casting because the surface preparation wasn't perfect. That's the 1.3% deficit. A Kessler foundry with proper surface prep equipment could achieve 99.9. You achieved 98.7 in a chamber designed for electronics assembly, using a clamp you built from a cargo loader. The clamp worked. The clamp was not authorized. The clamp is made from decommissioned parts that were scheduled for recycling. I checked the disposition log. Dreln looked at me. His skin sheen had reached a level I had never observed on him, full emotional activation, the dermal moisture catching the bay lights and giving his mottled gray-green skin a luminous quality. Among the Vesk, full activation meant the cognitive load had exceeded the threshold where physiological suppression was feasible. He was feeling something he could not smooth over with procedure. "How long," he said, "have you known this technique?" "My grandfather taught me when I was 14. He was a jeweler. He used a version of it for setting precious metals, not in vacuum, not at this scale, but the principle was the same. Clean surfaces bond. It's not a secret. It's in our engineering textbooks. First-year university material." First year. The physics is simple. The execution is patience. Solvik spoke. "How much patience?" 5 hours and 40 minutes, including surface prep, evacuation, bonding, and equilibration. The foundry replacement takes 14 station weeks and costs more than this apprentice will earn in 3 exchange rotations. Solvik was addressing Dreln, but his eyes were on the diagnostic display. "The manual says replace. The manual does not say repair because the manual was written by engineers who did not know this technique existed. The technique is older than the manual. The technique is older than the manifold series. The technique is older than Kessler." "How much older?" Dreln asked. His question was directed at me. "Humans discovered cold welding by accident in the 19th century, formalized the theory in the 20th, started applying it industrially in the 21st. The principle that clean metal surfaces bond on contact has been understood for roughly 400 years. 400 years. Dreln's voice had gone flat, not dismissal flat, recalibration flat. "You have known how to do this for 400 years and you have not taught it." "We teach it, it's in our textbooks. Nobody asked." Dreln looked at Solvik. Solvik looked at Dreln. The look between them carried a weight I recognized, not anger, not embarrassment, but the specific cognitive dissonance of competent professionals discovering a gap in their competence that was not caused by ignorance but by the architecture of their assumptions. They had not failed to learn the technique. They had failed to imagine that the technique existed, because the framework they operated within, the manual, the certification structure, the foundry supply chain, had never suggested that it should. Solvik spoke first. "How many other techniques exist in your first-year textbooks that are not in our manuals?" "I would need to see your manuals." "We have 412 standard maintenance procedures." "I have not counted hours." "The number would not be directly comparable. Your procedures are technique-specific. Ours are principle-based. A principle generates techniques depending on the problem." Solvik processed this. His skin sheen elevated 2 degrees, the Vesk physiological marker for encountering an organizational concept that challenged an organizational assumption. "You are describing a different way of storing knowledge." "I am describing a different relationship with knowledge. Your manual is a list of answers. Our textbooks are a set of questions with worked examples. When you encounter a new problem, you look for the matching answer. When we encounter a new problem, we look for the matching question and derive the answer. And cold welding is a derived answer. Cold welding is a derived answer to the question, how do you join 2 things without heat? The principle is clean surfaces bond. The derivation produces the technique. The technique produces the repair. The repair produces, I gestured at the diagnostic display, still glowing green. That. The silence that followed was the longest I had experienced in 11 station weeks on the Vesk repair bay. Not the diagnostic silence of earlier, not the 4 seconds of uncategorized input being processed. This was structural silence. The silence of a system encountering a variable that did not challenge one entry in the manual, but challenged the manual itself. The assumption that the manual was complete, that the procedures it contained represented the full set of available solutions, that the absence of a procedure meant the absence of a possibility. Solvec broke it. The platform loses 40,000 trade units per day. The manifold is repaired to 98.7%. What is the procedure for returning a condemned unit to service? There is no procedure, Dreln said. The unit was condemned. Then we need a new procedure, one that accounts for this. Dreln looked at the manifold housing, looked at the diagnostic display, looked at me. His secondary eyelids cycled through a rapid sequence, 3 blinks in 2 seconds, that I had catalogued during my 11 station weeks as the VESC physiological marker for a decision being made against institutional instinct. Apprentice Coulter, you will document the technique, full procedure materials list, surface preparation standards, clamping specifications, tolerance margins, every step. I can have it written by tomorrow. You will have it written by tonight. I want it on my desk before the shift change. He paused, his bladders inflated to quarter emphasis. And Coulter, the documentation will include a section on training requirements, how long to teach this technique to a VESC technician. The physics takes an afternoon. The surface preparation takes a week of practice to get consistent results. The patience, I considered. The patience is variable. Variable how? The technique requires sustained focus on repetitive microscale surface preparation for several hours without deviation or shortcut. The quality of the result is directly proportional to the patience of the practitioner. There is no way to rush it. A faster technician does not produce a better result. A more patient one does. Dreln absorbed this. Patience was not a metric the VESC maintenance system tracked. Speed was tracked. Accuracy was tracked. Throughput per shift was tracked. Patience, the capacity to repeat a motion at the same quality for hours without the quality degrading, was not in the performance framework because no VESC procedure had ever required it. The Kessler Foundry charges a premium, Solvec said quietly, because they are the only source for replacement housings. If this technique works on the Kessler series, it works on any crystalline manifold in the bay. The cost differential across a standard maintenance cycle would be significant, Dreln said. The word was small. The number behind it was not. The platform went back online the next morning, 14 station weeks ahead of schedule. The manifold held at rated pressure without deviation. The diagnostic was run 3 times because the first 2 results were identical, and the VESC quality assurance protocol for unprecedented outcomes required a minimum of 3 confirming tests before the result could be classified as real rather than instrument error. 3 tests, 3 green screens, 3 confirmations that a condemned manifold repaired by a compact exchange apprentice using a jeweler's technique, a salvaged clamp, and 5 hours and 40 minutes of patience was performing within specification on a platform that generated 40,000 trade units per day. Dreln filed the reinstatement paperwork with a notation I later obtained a copy of through channels I will not describe because the channels involved Solvec, and a mutual understanding that documentation access was, like the borrowed torque gauge, a matter of practical necessity rather than formal authorization. The notation read, "Unit restored to service via non-standard repair technique performed by exchange apprentice E. Coulter, human, compact cohort. Technique is not in the current maintenance manual. Recommend review and potential inclusion. Structural integrity confirmed at 98.7% of original specification. Cost of repair, 0 material expenditure. Time to repair, 5 hours 40 minutes. Time saved versus replacement, 14 station weeks. Revenue preserved, estimated 560,000 trade units." Below the notation, in the smaller font the VESC used for personal remarks in official documents, a practice that was technically unauthorized but so widespread that the authorization system had developed a tacit blindness to it, Dreln had added, The apprentice was assigned to sweep deck plating. His certification level does not reflect his capability. This should be corrected. The documentation took me 4 hours to write. Not because the technique was complex. The physics fit on 2 pages. But because translating it into VESC procedural format required adapting the instructions to a cognitive framework that processed procedures as sequential checklists with quantified tolerances and binary pass-fail criteria at each step. Human craft knowledge did not work that way. My grandfather had not taught me cold welding as a checklist. He had taught it as a practice, a way of engaging with the material that was part technique, part sensory feedback, part accumulated judgment about when the surface was ready. Converting, you will know when it feels right under the loupe, into surface reflectivity uniformity shall achieve 98% or greater as measured by aligned light scatter coefficient, using standard optical assessment tool. Took the kind of translation work that happened at the border between 2 civilizations' ways of knowing things. Every paragraph was a negotiation between what I knew in my hands and what the VESC needed on a page. I filed the document with Dreln at shift change. He read it at his station, secondary eyelids at the half position that meant focused processing. The bay was quiet, not end-of-shift quiet, but the particular quiet of a workspace still digesting an event that had no entry in the institutional memory. "This is comprehensive," he said. "It is the best I can do in your format." The training section. You estimate 8 days for basic proficiency and 40 days for independent practice on critical components. For a VESC technician, yes. That is a long training period for a single technique. The technique is not the hard part, the patience is. Your technicians are trained for speed. This requires the opposite, not faster, steadier. The word settled over Dreln's station like a foreign atmosphere. Steadier. It was not a VESC performance term. Their vocabulary for craft excellence was built entirely on velocity and precision, fast and right. The idea that a third axis existed, that slow and right occupied different territory than fast and right, was landing on a conceptual surface that had no prior impression to receive it. The next morning, Solvik appeared at my workstation with a manifold housing I did not recognize. Different series, not Kessler, something older, with a fracture pattern more complex than the first. 2 cracks, intersecting with a stress zone at the junction that made the repair geometry significantly more challenging. "Yanath series," he said, "decommissioned 3 station cycles ago, replacement on backorder for 11 months. The platform it served has been running on a temporary bypass that reduces efficiency by 12%. He set it on my bench. Can you do this one?" I examined the fracture under the loupe. The intersecting cracks created a surface preparation challenge, 2 planes of contact instead of 1, with the junction requiring blended geometry that would need to match across both planes simultaneously. My grandfather had done something similar once, repairing a cracked sapphire bezel on a vintage watch. The geometry had been harder than the sapphire, but the patience had been the same. 8 hours, maybe 10. The junction geometry is 3-dimensional rather than planar. Solvik's secondary eyelids shifted to quarter, the modeling position. He was running the technique against the new geometry inside his head and finding that the model did not break. "I will inform Dreln. The vacuum chamber will be available after the second shift." Solvik stopped at the bay threshold on his way out. The VESC did not turn for personal asides. They delivered them facing forward, maintaining the spatial grammar of institutional communication while violating its content. The younger technicians are asking about the documentation. It is filed, anyone can read it. They are not asking to read it, they are asking to watch. Watch what? You working, they want to see the patients. The Yanath repair took 9 hours and 12 minutes. I had an audience of 9 for the first 4 hours, technicians who drifted to the observation window in 1s and 2s, staying for 10 minutes or 40, watching the lapping strokes with the same quiet absorption their species brought to studying unfamiliar organisms. Some took notes. Some simply stood, secondary eyelids at the half position, processing. The critical moment came at hour 5, when the rotating lap pattern I had developed for the junction zone produced a surface geometry that the alignment paste confirmed at 97% uniformity, close, but not close enough for the intersection where the two fracture planes met. The junction demanded 99. I could see, under the loop, the microscopic irregularity where the two planes converged, a region roughly the width of a human hair, where the crystal lattice had been disrupted by the original fracture in a way that resisted planar lapping. I sat with it, 3 minutes of looking, not measuring, not calculating, looking, letting the geometry tell me what it needed. Then I rotated the abrasive film 45 degrees, changing the lap angle to match the junction's natural crystal orientation rather than my imposed planar approach, and resumed. The paste check after 30 minutes showed 98.6 at the junction, close enough to proceed to vacuum. Harder than the Kessler, the junction zone required a technique I had to develop on the spot, a rotating lap pattern that addressed both fracture planes and their intersection as a unified surface problem rather than 3 separate ones. The solution came to me in hour 4, sitting in the vacuum chamber with the loop pressed to my eye and the abrasive film poised over a geometry my grandfather's technique had not explicitly addressed, because my grandfather had never repaired intersecting fractures in a cylindrical pressure housing designed by an alien civilization for deep atmosphere gas harvesting. But the principle held: clean surfaces bond, the geometry was new, the physics was old. Post-repair diagnostic, 97.9%. Slightly lower than the Kessler, the junction zone showed a thin band of reduced integrity where the three-dimensional surface matching had achieved 97 rather than 99% contact. Acceptable. Within specification. The Yaneth platform could come off its bypass. Dreln examined the diagnostic display for 12 seconds, a significant investment of attention for a result he could have read in 2. The Yaneth series replacement was quoted at 23,000 trade units, he said, plus 11 months of reduced platform efficiency at 12%, which compounds to roughly 91,000 in lost throughput. Total cost of the current situation, 114,000 trade units. And the cost of this repair, 9 hours of chamber time and the apprentice's labor rate, which is 3 trade units per hour. He did the arithmetic with the speed the VESC brought to every calculation, 27 trade units total. The number hung in the Bay Air like a fact looking for permission to be real. 114,000 versus 27. The ratio was so lopsided that the VESC accounting framework had difficulty processing it, because accounting frameworks are built on the assumption that inputs and outputs maintain some recognizable proportionality, and this proportionality was not recognizable. Dreln stared at the number on his data pad for 6 seconds, then set the pad down and looked at the repaired manifold as though it had said something rude in a language he was only beginning to understand. The day after the Yaneth repair, a third manifold appeared on my bench. This one arrived without Solvec's quiet intermediation. It came through the official intake system, logged by the duty clerk with the processing notation, routing to Coulter, non-standard repair assessment. My name in the system, not as an apprentice assignment, as a routing destination. The housing was a Pelrath series environmental regulator, a smaller component than the Kessler or Yaneth, but with a fracture that presented an entirely different challenge. The crack had propagated through a section of the housing that contained embedded sensor leads. The cold welding technique would bond the structural alloy, but the sensor leads running through the repair zone would need to survive the bonding pressure without deformation. I spent 2 hours examining the problem before touching an abrasive film. The Vesk who walked past my station during those 2 hours saw a human sitting motionless with a loop, and several of them slowed their pace, not stopping, because stopping would have been a visible expenditure of attention they were not yet ready to commit, but decelerating enough that their peripheral scan had time to register what I was doing. What I was doing was thinking. Slow thinking. The kind where you let the problem sit in your mind the way a stone sits in water, and you wait for the shape of the solution to emerge from the shape of the problem. And the waiting is not idleness, but the most active part of the work. The solution. Lap the structural surfaces to bonding grade on either side of the sensor lead channels, but leave the channels themselves untouched. Bond the structural alloy in vacuum. Then, after repressurization, use a micro-welding technique, heat-based, targeted at a scale small enough that the thermal impact would be confined to the lead junctions, to reconnect the sensor leads across the bonded joint. Structural repair by cold welding. Sensor repair by precision heat welding. 2 techniques married, each doing what the other could not. The Vesk had the micro-welding equipment. They used it daily for electronics work. They had never thought to combine it with a technique they did not know existed. The repair took 11 hours. The structural cold welding phase consumed 7. The sensor lead channels created interruptions in the lapping surface that required me to work each segment independently, maintaining continuity across the gaps by reference to the alignment paste pattern rather than by continuous stroke. Like repairing a mosaic where some tiles are missing and must be skipped without disturbing the ones that remain. The micro-welding phase consumed 3 hours and 40 minutes. I worked with Vesk precision tools for the first time, equipment designed for their 4-fingered hands, which I operated with the compensated grip. I had spent 3 weeks teaching my doubled fingers in the early station weeks, when nobody was watching because nobody cared what the apprentice was doing with calibration equipment during off hours. The sensor lead reconnections required a heat input measured in millijoules, applied through a contact tip the diameter of a human eyelash, held steady for 0.8 seconds per junction. 16 junctions, 16.8 second moments of absolute stillness. The remaining time was testing. Dreln authorized the chamber time without hesitation and without the liability disclaimer that had accompanied the first repair. The disclaimers had been replaced by something that looked, in the Vesk behavioral register, remarkably like trust, though a Vesk would have called it evidence-based authorization, because trust without evidence was not a concept their professional vocabulary supported. Post-repair diagnostic, 98.1% structural, 100% sensor functionality. The embedded leads had survived. The technique had expanded. Dreln's notation on the 3rd repair's paperwork was shorter than the first 2. 3 words in the personal remarks font. Technique continues to generalize. A junior technician named Kelev Toss had been watching from the adjacent workstation through all 3 repairs. Kelev was young, 2 station cycles into her career, skin still the light sage green of Vesk youth, throat bladders proportionally large in the way that young Vesk carried them before the rest of their body caught up. She had not spoken during any of the repairs. She had watched each with the sustained attention that the Vesk reserved for phenomena they were actively categorizing. After the Pelrath repair, she appeared at my workstation during the shift overlap. The 20-minute window between departing and arriving crews, when the bay was at minimum population and conversations could happen without a full audience. "Foreman," she said, addressing Dreln at his supervisor's station, "I would like to request training in the documented technique." Dreln looked at her, then at me. Then at the bay floor, where the shift overlap meant only 8 technicians were present, but all 8 were oriented toward the conversation with the studied casualness of sentient beings, pretending not to eavesdrop in a room with excellent acoustics. "How many of you," Dreln said to the bay at large, "would like to request training?" 11 arms extended to 45 degrees. the standard VESC acknowledgement posture. The 8 present plus 3 who had apparently been waiting in the corridor for precisely this question, entering the bay with a timing that was either coincidence or the product of the VESC subvocal communication network that operated at frequencies humans could feel as a faint buzzing in the sinuses, but could not decode. 11 out of 26. In a bay that had laughed at the concept 3 weeks ago. Drelln's throat bladders inflated to the full emphasis configuration, the one I had seen him use exactly twice before, both times when issuing safety directives. Training will be scheduled, he said. The human will supervise initial practice sessions, condemned stock only until proficiency standards are established. He looked at me. Apprentice Coulter, you appear to have become a training resource. I'm still an apprentice. The paperwork says what the paperwork says. The bay says something different. I have learned in the last several weeks that the bay is more accurate than the paperwork. The training began the following week. I started Kelev and 2 other junior technicians on condemned stock, fractured housings from the disposal inventory, parts that were already classified as waste and could not be further damaged by practice. The first lesson was not technique, it was tempo. The VESC approached the abrasive work the way they approached everything: fast, efficient, systematic. Kelev's first lap pattern was perfect in geometry and catastrophic in pace. She removed twice the material per pass that the technique required, because her hands were trained to the bay's throughput rhythm, and the bay's throughput rhythm was twice the speed the technique could tolerate. Slower, I said. She slowed by 10%. Slower. Another 10%. Half that. She looked at me with the expression VESC wore when they were told something that contradicted their training. Secondary eyelids drawn together. Head angle flat. The physiological configuration of someone whose professional instincts were being asked to reverse polarity. At this speed, she said, the surface preparation would take 4 hours. Yes. A standard gasket replacement takes 40 minutes. This is not a gasket replacement. The manual defines efficiency as the manual defines efficiency for the procedures the manual contains. This procedure is not in the manual. It has a different efficiency. The efficiency is measured in surface quality, not speed. Fast preparation produces poor surfaces. Poor surfaces produce failed bonds. Failed bonds produce condemned housings, which is where these parts started, so if you would like to end up back where you began, by all means go faster. Kelev looked at the condemned housing, looked at her abrasive film, looked at the loop. Then she reset her grip, lowered her stroke rate to half the speed her training demanded, and began again. It took her 3 condemned housings to find the rhythm. The third one, she lapped for 2 hours without speaking, her stroke rate steady, her secondary eyelids at the half position that meant focused engagement rather than restless scanning. Her skin sheen dropped to resting state, the calm of someone whose hands had found a tempo that the rest of their body could sustain. Her pace check showed 93% contact uniformity. Not repair grade that required 98, but the right shape of a starting point. The quality distribution was uniform across the surface, which meant her technique was consistent even if it was not yet precise. Precision would come with practice. Consistency was harder to teach, and she had it. Again, she said. Not a question. The VESC word for repetition carried no negative connotation. In a culture built on standardization, doing something again was the protocol for improvement. She lapped the 4th condemned housing to 95% in 90 minutes, the 5th to 96.8 in 2 hours. Her hands had internalized the tempo, and her eyes had calibrated to the loop's feedback. The surface quality was improving because the practitioner was no longer fighting the technique. She was learning to let it happen. My grandfather would have said she was listening to the metal. I did not say that to Kelev because the metaphor would have translated into Vesk as either a maintenance disorder or a religious claim, and neither would have been productive. Instead, I said, the surface is telling you where the high spots are. Trust what the paste shows you. Work the high spots. Leave the rest alone. Trust, she repeated. The Vesk word for trust carried engineering connotations, reliability, verified confidence, tested assurance. They did not use it for things that were not yet verified. Trusting the paste meant trusting the process before the process had proven itself. And for a species that verified everything 3 times before classifying it as real, that was a significant conceptual step. She took it. By day 12, her paste checks were hitting 97% consistently. By day 20, 98. On day 37, 3 days ahead of my training estimate, she completed her first supervised repair on a live Kessler housing. 97.4% structural integrity. The diagnostic display went green, and Kelev's throat bladders did something I recognized from the very first morning of my apprenticeship. They inflated to full display. Not in laughter this time. In something the Vesk did not yet have a professional vocabulary for, because the emotion it expressed had not previously occurred in a professional context. Solvek, standing beside me at the observation window, provided the word I was looking for. Satisfaction, he said, watching Kelev through the glass. But a kind we do not usually experience here, not the satisfaction of fast completion, the satisfaction of slow completion, of having waited for the right result instead of accepting the fast one. We have a word for that. What word? Craftsmanship. Solvek tried the word. The Vesk vocal apparatus handled the consonant cluster at the end with a wet click that made it sound like a technical classification, which, in fairness, it was. By the end of my 3rd station month, I had repaired 11 manifolds across 4 series, including 2 with embedded sensor arrays, and 1 with a fracture geometry so complex that I had spent 3 hours in the thinking before touching phase. Dreln had walked past my station twice during that thinking, each time with his secondary eyelids fully retracted, each time without interrupting, because he had learned, slowly, steadily, the way the technique itself taught, that stillness in the human was not idleness but preparation, and preparation was the half of the work that produced the other half's quality. The Bay's condemned stock inventory had dropped by 40%, not from disposal, but from repair. Solvek had completed 2 solo repairs. Kelev was working her 3rd unsupervised case. Dreln, to my genuine surprise, had requested his own practice time on condemned stock. Not supervised. He worked alone, after hours in the Bay's quiet shift. Solvek mentioned it once, in the corridor, with the studied neutrality of a Vesk delivering information he considered important enough to share and personal enough to understate. The foreman is learning the technique. He works on condemned housings between the 2nd and 3rd shifts. His pace checks are at 91%. He has not asked for assistance. He is, I believe, learning the patience. The image of Dreln Vasic, senior foreman, 19-year veteran, the man whose throat bladders had inflated in collective laughter at my proposal 3 months ago, sitting alone at a bench after hours, lapping a condemned manifold surface at half his natural speed, learning to be steady instead of fast, was worth more than any reclassification paperwork in the Vesk filing system. 3 more junior technicians were in active training, their practice sessions producing the same slow transformation I had watched in Kelev. The gradual deceleration of Vesk hands from their trained velocity to the tempo the technique demanded, the reluctant recalibration from throughput to surface quality, the moment, always quiet, always unmarked, when the technician stopped fighting the pace and started trusting the process. Dreln had requisitioned proper surface preparation equipment from the compact supply chain, optical-grade lapping plates, calibrated pressure systems, vacuum-rated alignment tools that made my improvised clamp look like what it was. A cargo loader cylinder with ideas above its station. The clamp remained in service alongside the new equipment because it worked, and the bay had absorbed something during these months. The provenance of a tool mattered less than the result it produced. The foreman's quarterly report listed the bay's cost savings from manifold repair versus replacement. The number had 6 digits. Dreln had filed the report with the notation he reserved for outcomes that exceeded projection. Result exceeds baseline. Methodology under review for system-wide adoption. The notation below the official entry in the personal remarks font read, "The apprentice was assigned to sweep deck plating. His certification level did not reflect his capability. This has been corrected." The delay in correction represents institutional opportunity cost that should not be repeated for future exchange personnel. The station's administrative division had taken notice. A memorandum circulated, internal, dry, bearing the bureaucratic prose style that made VESC administrative writing indistinguishable from their engineering manuals, requesting a review of exchange apprentice onboarding protocols across all maintenance divisions. The memorandum did not mention me by name. It mentioned recent developments in Bay 7 that suggest current certification structures may not capture the full capability range of compact exchange personnel. The understatement was quintessentially VESC, a 6-digit cost saving and a fundamental revision of maintenance methodology, described as recent developments. Solvec, who had developed a talent for routing internal documents to my data pad through channels that existed in the organizational structure, the way dark matter exists in the universe, theoretically necessary, practically invisible, forwarded me the memorandum with a single-line annotation. They are starting to ask questions they should have asked 11 station weeks ago. My reclassification had been expedited twice, from 6 station weeks to 3. Then from 3 to 1, after Dreln filed a supplementary request with the subject line, "Ongoing revenue implications of classification delay." It was approved on a Tuesday. By Wednesday morning, my workstation had been moved to the precision repair section, the area where senior technicians worked on the components the manual classified as critical infrastructure. My name was on the station assignment board, not Apprentice Coulter, not Exchange Provisional, just Coulter, E in the same format as every other name on the board. Dreln was at his supervisor's station when I walked in. He did not look up, did not acknowledge the reassignment with a speech or a ceremony. The VESC did not do ceremonies for things that should have been true from the beginning. They corrected the record and moved on. But his secondary eyelids were at full retraction, the sustained attention position, and his skin sheen was at the moderate elevation I had learned to read as satisfaction, not the satisfaction of fast completion, the satisfaction of slow correction, of an error identified, measured, and resolved, which was the only kind of satisfaction the VESC truly trusted. A manifold was waiting on the new bench, fresh intake, a clean stress fracture, the kind that propagated slowly under cyclic loading, growing a micron at a time until the housing failed or was caught in inspection. This one had been caught. 6 hours of work. Straightforward. I sat down, opened my kit, positioned the loop. In the back of the bay, Kelev was training a first-cycle apprentice on a condemned housing. I could hear her voice, steady, measured, using the same cadence I had used with her, which was the same cadence my grandfather had used with me. Slow enough to be heard, patient enough to be trusted, quiet enough that the hands could do the listening. "Slower," she said. The apprentice's stroke rate dropped. "Slower. Again. There, hold that. The surface will tell you when it is ready." I leaned into the loop. The manifold's crystalline structure was visible under magnification, ordered, regular, waiting. The crack had interrupted the lattice. The technique would reconnect it. The only variable was time and care, and both were unlimited to anyone willing to supply them. Somewhere in the bay, a single throat bladder inflated, quiet laughter, social cascade size. 1. A single Vesk, amused by something. Possibly the ongoing fact that the most cost-effective repair technique in the Bay's 40-year history had walked through the door in the hands of a human apprentice who had spent his first 11 station weeks sweeping floor plating, because the manual said that was all he was qualified to do. I did not look up. The manifold needed attention. The loop needed steady hands. The technique needed what it had always needed, the patience to do small things carefully until the small things added up to something the manual had never imagined. Clean surfaces bond, simple physics, patient hands. My grandfather would have called it setting a stone. The Vesk were calling it the Coulter method, and I could live with that.